Boat number 81. Got 81. Boat number 82. Got 82. What's up? Boat number 83. Got 83. Boat number 84. Got 84. Boat number 85.
Well, this is how my tournament started out on Kissimmee. Kind of a cluster right from the start, trying to get takeoff, boat number 82, and having boats come up from behind me and take off in front of me. And it was probably kind of a premonition of the cluster that I was about to get into on the Kissimmee chain for the first Major League Fishing Invitationals event. Stick around, guys. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Mark Fisher Outdoors, everybody. I'm Mark Fisher, and this is my tournament recap video for a completely awful first event on Major League Fishing Invitationals on the Kissimmee chain. I did a practice recap where I was telling you that I was catching plenty of fish, but nothing that was truly big, and I was hoping that the big bites would come during the tournament. And the reality is that this fish that you're about to see right now was probably one of the bigger fish that I caught. I think close to a 3-pound fish here. And the interesting thing, again, I'm going to kind of relay this, is that during practice I had clusters of areas where there were a number of bites in a certain area. I would go along, not catch fish, I'd get into a certain area, and there'd be 5 to 10 waypoints that I was putting in there catching these fish. And I was throwing primarily a speed worm or Cinco. And I found a lot of different, throughout the week with the cold front coming in, there were times when I was swimming the speed worm. There were times when I was letting it sink to the bottom on a smaller weight and just kind of, popping it to get that tail to flutter, and they would hit it off the bottom. But I went in during the tournament, and this first fish that you see here I caught that fish within the first 15 minutes of getting down through the locks and getting to Kissimmee, and caught that. And so, to be honest, it's not a bad fish. It's a close to a 3-pound fish, and thought, okay, in 15 minutes, this is on the time schedule that I would have been thinking of fishing every 10, 15 minutes. However, I fished around that area for another hour or so without another bite. So I moved to my second area that, again, I had a large number of waypoints. And again, you're seeing this shot here where you can tell that I'm in a little bit different area, and I hadn't made more than 5 casts in this area, and I get bit again. And a much smaller fish, but it's still kind of telling me, all right, these areas that I got are holding fish. And I'm looking at it like, okay, every time I pick up the speed worm, I'm getting bit. Believe me, guys, I'm throwing other baits. I'm throwing chatterbaits. I'm throwing baits that I would think would get bigger bites, and I'm just not getting anything at all. And as soon as I pick up the speed worm again, I'm getting bit pretty quickly. The fish are telling me throw the speed worm. The problem is that the size of the fish that I'm catching with that speed worm just aren't anywhere near what I need. And so after fishing this area around for, again, another hour or so without getting another bite, I decided to go and move to the next clump of waypoints, and this is going to be interesting because you're seeing I'm pulling in to this next area. This is actually on Lake Hatchinaw, and I pull in, and it's so consistent. Just take a look at what happens here. The very first cast getting into this next area, and another keeper fish. It's hard. It's hard when the lessons that the fish are teaching you is go to these areas that had big clumps because that's where the fish are, and you get bit so quickly after arriving there, and then don't get bit again for the remainder of that area. That was the part that was consistent on day one of this tournament. So, first cast, catch that fish. I've got, again, a cluster of waypoints. I stay in this area for another hour or so, fishing around, fishing those cane heads, and don't get bit again. Come into this little channel that's got a lily pad field right by this channel, and again, had several fish out at the mouth of that channel, fished around and caught a little, barely keeper off of that to make my fourth fish of the day. And the fish are just getting smaller and smaller, no size at all. Still throwing that speed worm, and really, really struggling in terms of catching one fish out of these areas that I had several fish in practice. And when I'm saying several, guys, I'm talking about 5 to 10. So at this point in my day, on day one, I'm getting to the point, because of the locks, I'm getting to where I've got a couple hours, maybe 2.5 hours left of my fishing day, and I don't want to be in a position where I'm racing to get back and having to get through the lock. So at this point, with 4 fish in the well, I decide that it's time to run through the lock. And as I talked about in that practice recap video, I did spend a day in Toho, so I had some areas again that I had some fish on in Toho, so I decided to run through the lock and get to my areas on Toho. And in this situation here, this is after getting through the lock up on Toho, and picked up a Cinco and just started flipping some of this Kissimmee grass. And boy, I tell you, if you could get to an area that had the Kissimmee grass and lily pads, hydrilla, there were typically fish that were hanging in there. You just have to kind of flip into there. And this was a relatively, a decent sized fish. Again, not by Florida standards, but certainly by the standards that I had been catching on this first day. And so my day ended with that fish, 5 fish limit that barely just was 7 pounds 15 ounces, so just right at 8 pounds, and just not the day that I was expecting or hoping for on the first day of the Major League Fishing Invitationals. So day 2 started 10 degrees warmer than on day 1. It was about 41 degrees when we started on day 1, and we were up into the 50s on day 2. So we anticipated a little bit of a warmer day. And day 2 started, same game plan, run down through the lock and get down to Kissimmee and start in that first area that I started in yesterday, hoping that maybe the warmer temperatures were going to get the fish a little bit more active. And day 2 started a little differently also, in that I did not get bit right away. It took almost 45 minutes before I got bit for the first time. And so that kind of changed my thinking a little bit, in that, okay, if I can just kind of tool around here, I'm going to give this area more time. I'm not going to expect to get bit every 10 minutes or so. I'm just going to kind of stay in this area a little bit longer. Kind of, okay, this is what happened. I know that I can bounce around to my other areas, but rather than doing that, I'm gonna stay put for a while and see what happens. And so after catching this fish, I decided I'm gonna give this area some more time and see if I can catch some more fish out of this area. And this is, you can tell, kind of looking at this is kind of a grass flap. There are areas of emergent grass, pencil reeds, lily pads, but it's also got grass underneath the surface, and so it's just kind of swimming that speed worm, in what would be considered open areas with just over the grass, and I'm connecting more. You see that I'm getting smaller fish here. I think this is even a fish that I didn't even keep that fish. But I turn around and just in this pitch back, and I think this is where we're going to see that I catch another keeper size fish relatively quickly after that one. Guys, I keep going back to the same thing that I've preached and that I continue to struggle with, is that during practice, I stuck way too many fish. And so I had these areas that, I would catch 5 to 10 fish in, and I'm saying caught them. I didn't just locate them, but I caught them during practice. And so it made it harder during the tournament to go in and catch fish, especially these fish that quite possibly could have been males that were on beds, guarding fry, setting up beds. And if I stuck them during practice, they're going to be much harder to stick again using the same bait when it comes to tournament time. Had I just been marking them during practice using a bait without a hook, I feel like I probably would have had, again, would it have meant that I would have won the tournament? No, but my weights would have been more in the 12 to 13 or 14 pound range than in the 8 pound range. And, you know, that would have meant a big difference in terms of the points that I would have ended up with versus where I ended up in this tournament. It's a lesson that I continue to preach, and it's a lesson that I continue to not learn, and I need to do better at it. And again, I've said this so many times on this channel, guys, is that there are things that you're going to learn from me because I may know something that you don't know, and there are things that I need to continue to learn, and at least you can learn from my mistakes. And that would be one of them, is if you're fishing, practicing for a tournament, sticking fish is just not a good idea. I'm convinced of it, and yet I still have a hard time changing that behavior when practice comes around. And with that being said, guys, I would hope that you would subscribe to the channel. We're all trying to learn here, and I'm willing to, you know, kind of put this out. I'm embarrassed as heck about this tournament. I truly am, and yet I'm putting this recap video out because I would hope that you get something from it, even if it's what not to do. And I'm going to continue to try and, you know, get that knowledge out there, get that information out there to people. We eliminate water to find the best water to fish. And in this case, we're kind of saying, hey, don't do the things that I'm doing in this situation, because it ends up in these types of results. So, you know, it's not fun. These are not fun lessons to learn, and it's definitely not a fun video for me to put out, but I definitely hope that, you know, it's beneficial, and I'd hope that you would subscribe to the channel and continue to watch Mark Fisher Outdoors and these on the water Wednesdays or underwater Wednesdays that we put out each Wednesday. So like I said, unlike the first day, this fish here, I think it'll end up being the 4th fish that I end up catching out of the first spot that I went to on both days. So I ended up getting 4 fish out of my starting spot. My area that I thought during practice held the most fish and the best chance of getting decent quality fish. I'm back into Lake Hatchinaw here at this point, and I believe I've got 4 fish, and again, just kind of pulled in, fishing those reed clumps. And this is my keeper fish for day 2. Again, not a very big fish, but it fills out the limit. And then the final fish that I ended up catching in the tournament was one where I was, again, pitching that speed worm in and just kind of crawling it along the bottom into some lily pads. And this was a fish that I didn't stick during practice. I knew that there was a fish here. I worked the area pretty close. He ended up getting me tangled up into the pads, but I was able to kind of go in there after him, wrestle him out, and be able to cull out one of the smaller fish for this fish. Guys, we appreciate you tuning in to Mark Fisher Outdoors. Like I said, I'd hope that you would subscribe. Again, I'm not really thrilled with putting this video out showing you 2 days of 8 pounds worth of fish on Florida lakes where you can catch one fish for over 8 pounds. But, you know, I'm going to put out recap videos whether I come in first place or whether I come in last place. And unfortunately, this was a tournament where I definitely ended up in the bottom third of the field, and I'm not proud of that. And so I'm going to kind of, after shooting this video, kind of put Florida out of my memory and kind of focus on Hartwell and what we're going to be doing there, because we have a very short turnaround. We'll be in Hartwell on March 14th for that tournament. And so that means we actually leave a week before that. And so, you know, we'll do it all again on Lake Hartwell. Guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll have more videos coming out tomorrow, guys. Take care.